Hello and welcome to the Goal Podcast, news and commentary from Gun Owners Action League, your leading voice for the Massachusetts gun owner.
I'm Garrett, across the table from Jeff. How's it going, man?
You're back from vacation.
Back from vacation. We spent a couple weeks out on the left coast in California, so I like to joke with the guys that, I wanted to go to a state that had better gun laws than Massachusetts, so I went to California.
Oh,
It hurts, doesn't it?
It's a tough pill to swallow.
The way things are right at the moment, that's pretty tough. It hurts me to say it, too. It's like a knife in the heart.
But there's forward progress. Things are in motion, which we will talk about later.
Yeah.
But in the meanwhile, happy to announce the Goal website. It's back up.
That's good stuff.
Able to join, donate, membership renewals, it's back up and functioning. So
that's right. So Goal, was it about a month ago or so? We started this transition to a new software that handles like the website and the membership and all the back end stuff. And there was a period of transition where we had to migrate all of the information from the old system to the new system. And it's rather a lot of data, and the systems don't necessarily talk, in very friendly terms. So there was a fair amount of manual labor, we kept Angie supplied with cases of red wine and chocolates and, and tried not to bother her, but
yeah, it's tough. It's been one of the ongoing challenges is finding software, finding something that can do all the things that we needed to do in the scales that we needed to do.
Exactly.
So you have, there are things that do website hosting and e-commerce, but they don't do the membership stuff,
right? Or
they don't handle membership in the scale we need. So there's a lot of membership software that's great for, a couple hundred people for a church group, or even, up to 1,000 people for like a youth sports league. But to find something that could handle the tens of thousands is more challenging, because typically the next step up is
the millions.
Millions of members and databases for, MasterCard or...
And well, that would be nice. And we'll get there one day. That's not where we are right now.
But
so a lot of manual work went into switching over. The staff has been, burning the midnight oil, and thankfully there's nothing else going on right at the moment that would be distracting. The timing's horrible, but anyway, kudos to the staff for getting that done. So you should be able to now handle your memberships and your renewals online. So go to goal.org, check it out.
Now, before we get into the dumpster fire that is everything that's happened over the last few weeks, we have a guest coming on, Cam Edwards.
Yeah, the one and only Cam Edwards. Excited.
I found this thing, and it made me feel, it was like a feel-good story for me about a new product that I saw, not an endorsement of the company, but a new product that I thought was kind of cool, kind of innovative, and a different approach for doing things. So Vortex, the optics company, is now offering custom rifle scope turrets.
The turrets.
Just the turret.
So this is a custom turret, custom cap for their rifle scopes.
So as the fall hunting season approaches, something that happens is you zero your optic, your firearm, for whatever distance you zero it at. Mm-hmm. And how often does that deer, that turkey, or whatever walk right out of that distance?
They're not very cooperative,
So you have to somehow make an adjustment. Whether you are just physically going to aim high, low, left, right, a little Kentucky windage. Or if you adjust your scope, so now you're shifting your zero, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So your point of aim and point of impact is at the correct distance. Now, years prior, that was kind of not really an option, because you would have to take off the little cap that protects the dial.
Adjustment. Yeah.
So people didn't do that in the field. Then a lot of companies came out with what they called exposed turrets that you could change and you could dial one way or the other without having to take an extra cap off. Then what you would have to do is go to the range and shoot at various distances to see exactly how many clicks up or down you'd have to turn your scope turret to make adjustments for different distances. And you'd have to make a little chart to know how to make
go
those
back and
adjustments.
forth between yards and MOAs and including all of your ballistic stuff.
So you'd have to know, you'd have to be able to convert how many inches am I off on a target to how many, minutes of angle or mil rads that is, and then do the conversion to how many clicks you need to adjust the scope. What Vortex has done is they say, all right, you send us all of your information on your firearm. Tell me what barrel length is, what the muzzle velocity of your bullet is, how much that bullet actually weighs, all the dirty details, all the way down to what elevation you're shooting at. And what they will do is they will put all the information into some software that will actually calculate all of those bullet drops at different distances. And then they take that information and then they laser etch it onto the outside of the turret. So now, instead of it just being numbers, it's marked in distance.
That's like a really cool idea.
One of the other things you can do is you can get multiple custom caps made for the same scope. So if you like shooting a 150 grain round for deer hunting in Massachusetts, well, I'll take that back because you can't hunt with a centerfire rifle in Massachusetts. For deer hunting in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Let's say you use a 150 grain round for that, but you also like to travel out west, hunt up in the mountains. You want something that's maybe a heavier grain weight, different ballistic coefficients or whatever. You can get multiple caps. So you go to your your other destination, you're going to use a different cartridge. You put that scope cap on and the guesswork's all done. So
I like it. It's pretty cool. And a really innovative use is sort of a value add for, they obviously have laser etching machines there. They obviously have the software to do all this stuff. So they're making it like a value add thing for their customers. I think it's a really cool idea.
Yeah, so it's currently only offered for a couple of lines. I think there's the Razor HD LHT models, and there's some Viper HD models. So I mean, you're already at least $1,000 into a scope, or
right? You may as well get
over $2,000 for the Razor.
You might as well get the $80.
The custom scope caps are $80.
Nice, yeah.
And so you set it for your distance, and it's just, hey, if you have a 200-yard shot, turn it to the 2. Yeah. If it's 250, go to 2.5. If it's 350, go to 3.5.
I like it.
So it takes a little bit of the on-the-fly guesswork out of your mind.
Yeah. I mean, there's of course, the purists are going to say that there's a lot to be said about, being able to do these conversions in your head. And sure there is, but this is a nice little, it's a nice little convenience thing.
Absolutely.
I like it.
But cool product, innovative thoughts.
And honestly, not all that hard for them to do. And it's just like a cool thing, So that's from Vortex. I bet other people start doing this too. I mean, it really is like a cool idea.
Yeah, I think innovative.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a fresh look at an existing issue or an existing way of doing things and saying, hey, we've always done it this way. Let's try something new. So,
all right. So like you alluded to a few minutes ago, we have the one and only Cam Edwards joining us in just a couple of minutes. So we're waiting for him to sign in. That's really cool. Author, 2A journalist. Everybody knows who Cam Edwards is. We'll get into what he's been up to, as well as what's been going on here in Massachusetts. As we know, things are pretty stormy here right at the moment. Yeah. So without too much further ado, let's jump in and let's talk to Cam. All right. Well, joining us now, we got the man himself, the one and only Cam Edwards. Everybody listening to this knows who you are, Cam, but real briefly, 2A author, journalist, editor at Bearing Arms, the host of Cam and Company. Excellent podcast. Love it. And
appreciate that.
SAF Journalist of the Year 2023. Let's not miss that. And all around nice guy with an epic beard. How's it going?
It is going well. It's better here in Virginia than it sounds like it's going to Massachusetts for you guys.
Yeah, things are not great here right at the moment. As you know, and as you've written about over the last few days. This Chapter 135 business being passed by the legislature and signed into law at record speed by Governor Maura Healey. It's been pretty disgusting.
It really has been. And it's amazing. You talk about this being signed at record speed, and you're right. They rushed to get this thing to her desk, but they took almost a year to write it, over a year, I guess, if you include the so-called listening tour that Representative Michael Day went on, right?
Air quotes, yeah.
So you would think that they would have written a bill that, I don't know, was functional. But I mean, it just sounds like the rollout of this has been an absolute disaster, right? I mean, people don't know what the training requirements are. Gun stores didn't know what they could sell when the law went into effect. And even now, you guys are going to have to update me because I still don't know. I mean, we're a week into this. What is the status quo? Have things been sort of pushed back until October? Is the state saying anything at all?
So we don't really even know. And so the state police have come out and said certain things regarding training, like we're going to keep processing applications until October, which, you know, if you take the view of that in view of the law that was passed, there's really no legal basis for them to say that. So
right.
You know, it's like everything is such a mess. And nobody knows what anything actually means. So they're just kind of throwing things out there saying, okay, we'll just keep doing things for the moment. And I don't know, hope for the best.
And not only are we running into issues with the unclear guidance from the state because the police, you know, sent one email out that said no new applicants. Then 2 days later, they said, yep, we'll still accept certificates. But the buck doesn't stop with the Massachusetts State Police either, because then even if they approve someone and say, hey, you have all the statutory blessings to have access to your rights, you're still subject to your local chief's discretion, and they have the final word. So any chief in any town can say, well, we feel like you're not duly trained, so therefore we find you unsuitable for a license. So we still have the suitability issue to deal with.
God, this is ridiculous. I'm glad to see that you guys have filed suit. I mean, you know, because this is just, I mean, every day that this is in place, you know, people's rights are being impacted here.
Oh, sure. I mean, everybody from, you know, obviously the average gun owner to retailers to trainers to every, you know, it's just, there's no part of Massachusetts gun ownership that this doesn't impact in a huge way. It's just, it's you know, I joke with Jeff and everything. I just got back from vacation in California, and I joke with people and say that, you know, I wanted to go somewhere that had better gun laws in Massachusetts, so I went to California. You know, it's bad, and nobody knows. Nobody really knows. But you're right. We have filed suit, and we're trying to take this a chunk at a time. And also, just as of yesterday, we filed paperwork at the State House to get a ballot question going to repeal Chapter 135 in its entirety. So I was there yesterday. That was really cool. A bunch of us went up to the State House to file paperwork for that. Got that done, or got it started anyway. And interestingly, for that, when you go to the State House in Massachusetts, or the executive building, which is around the corner at 1 Ashburton, I had to go through a security that was comparable or worse than the TSA, right? I had to take off my belt to get into the building so that we could go talk to the elections division. So contrast that with what's going on with, you know, voter IDs, et cetera. It's like,
right.
I can't talk to the government without stripping half naked in the lobby of a government building, but
you can sure put someone in power.
That's right.
You give it a couple of years, you'll get the full body cavity search before you can go through the door.
Some people have to pay extra for that. We get it for free. Cam, you've been, 20 years plus covering Second Amendment news all over the country. So looking at the scope of gun control legislation that's happened, everything from the Gun Control Act, the assault weapons ban in the 90s, everything that's happened in California, New Jersey, where do you think this bill for Massachusetts lands amongst, that gun control landscape?
It's a really good question. And I think it's one of the worst that I've seen. Because of how all encompassing it is, right? So it's not just a gun ban. It's not just restrictions on the right to carry. It's not just unfunded mandates for police departments. It's all of the above and more, right? So it's interesting. I saw a news story from one of the stations in Springfield a couple of days ago that spoke with a state representative, Bud Williams, who said that the bill, quote, aims to decrease the number of guns in the city. And I thought that was really telling. He didn't talk about illegal guns. He said it's about reducing the number of guns. And I think that is what this bill is about, right? It is primarily aimed at legal gun owners. And it is, I think, primarily designed to inhibit people from exercising a fundamental civil right. And again, it does so in a very all-encompassing way. So I think this is one of the worst gun bills that I've ever seen in 20 years of covering this issue. And, what's remarkable is it comes after Heller, it comes after McDonald, it comes after Bruin, it comes after the Supreme Court has said, hey, this is a real right. It's not a second-class right. You guys have to start respecting the right to keep and bear arms. And what we've seen in places like Massachusetts and California and Maryland, New Jersey, all of these really anti-gun states is just this willful and blatant disregard for what the Supreme Court has said. So, they've gotten rid of the may issue laws, right? So theoretically they're in compliance, but as you say, you still have to deal with suitability issues in Massachusetts and in many parts of New York. California, I think, even has, is that same sort of discretionary language that it still allows for the sort of arbitrary and capricious decision making on the part of these licensing authorities.
Keep that door open, yeah.
Yeah. So, as you say, I live in Central Virginia, not far from the town of Farmville. We're back in, I think it was 1960. It was 6 years after Brown versus Board of Education. Prince Edward County Schools said, you know what, we're going to shut down rather than integrate. And it was part of a what was called massive resistance to Brown versus Board of Education. And I think that's what we're seeing here across the country and certainly in Massachusetts when it comes to adhering to the Bruin decision. I think you are seeing massive resistance on the part of these state governments, specifically to deprive people or to chill the exercise of a civil right. And it's despicable in the 1960s, and it's just as despicable today.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, it's mass disobedience on the part of the legislature, on the part of the governments who are saying, no, how dare you get in the way of us, restricting the rights of the people.
Yeah, it's not civil disobedience, it's civic disobedience, right? It's these civic government institutions that are disobeying the Supreme Court's edict so they can continue to, trample over our individual rights.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it.
Yeah, they've certainly banked on the law-abiding gun owner remaining the law-abiding gun owner, for sure. And they're just trying to keep painting you into that corner of you have to comply, you have to comply, you have to comply. What, if any, impact do you think this kind of legislation has outside of Massachusetts? Because we do see this, half dozen to, maybe 8 or 9 states,
6 or 8,
seem to be in this existential battle to be the most gun controlling state possible, where
Massachusetts takes the lead. Yeah.
Notable with that particular politician's quote, they didn't say they want to get criminals off the street.
Oh, no. Right. There's not a single word in any of this 130 whatever pages about actual criminals. It's about making new criminals out of peaceable people. But
I'm glad that you brought that up. And there was another story I saw out of Springfield this week. I didn't have a chance to write about it at Bearing Arms, but there was a guy who was on GPS monitoring for one previous gun-related conviction. He had another gun-related conviction in his past as well. While he's on his GPS monitor, he goes out and allegedly commits another violent crime.
Yet another one with another gun.
Yeah, yet another one, right? So you look at this and you think, okay, well, I mean, it's not rocket science, right? If you want to cut down on violent crime, we know, for instance, that, in any given city, it's a really small number of people, maybe less than 1% of the city's population, that's responsible for 50, 60% of violent crime. So why not focus there, right? If you want to reduce crime by 50%, go after the 1% of people who are committing those violent crimes. But instead, the legislature is taking the exact opposite approach. And they said, no. The way to do this is to go after 100% of the legal gun owners, right? And as you say, either force them into this really small box where if you, stray outside the line, then holy crap, there's going to be, all kinds of legal consequences. Or even better, people say it's not worth the risk of exercising my Second Amendment rights. I'm going to give up my rights because I don't want to go to prison for doing something that I didn't even know was against the law.
Yeah.
And then I guess they think that there's some sort of trickle down effect, right? That if you just go after and crack down on lawful gun owners, that eventually it'll trickle down to criminals and they'll maybe, it'll be harder for them to get a hold of guns. I mean, listen, if I bought into that logic, I would have flipped by now. I'd be a gun control advocate. But I've been hearing these arguments for 20 years, and they don't make any more sense today than they did in 2004 when I started Cam and Company.
Well, hey, I've been waiting for an answer to the question when they talk about Glocks and Glock switches and the ghost guns, the polymer 80s that are so, according to them, readily convertible into machine guns. Where are all these Glock switches coming from? They're coming from overseas. And I'm pretty sure that there are regulations saying that foreign countries can't import machine guns into the United States without going through a whole series of steps. And I haven't gotten an answer yet as to why nobody's pursuing that at all.
Yeah, nobody seems to care about that.
But, the side-by-side shotgun in my safe is somehow a problem now.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, be careful what you wish for. I mean, the city of Chicago is suing Glock and trying to ban the sale of Glocks to Chicago residents. Right. So, In fact, it's probably been a month or so since I was talking with Pete Furselli, who's a retired, make sure I get the title right, retired deputy assistant director of the ATF.
Wow.
And before you say boo, Pete was actually one of the whistleblowers of Operation Fast and Furious. He was an ATF agent in the Phoenix office, saw what was going on, and thought, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Why are we allowing these guns to go across the border? How are we supposed to, keep track of where they go? So he was one of the ones who blew the whistle. He's no longer with ATF. He stepped down a couple of years ago, and he still has a lot of friends in the agency. And according to Pete, the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention, which, of course, is supposedly headed up by Kamala Harris, has been pressuring Steve Dettelbach, the ATF director, to institute a rule that would treat Glocks and maybe even a broader class of semi-automatic firearms as machine guns. Wow. Like, this is really what they want to do. They want to take that readily converted language and say, well, look, these Glock switches are showing up. Glock refuses to change its design. So now we should be treating Glocks and maybe every semi-automatic firearm as a readily converted to full auto.
But not an adversarial foreign country that's importing them to the United States.
Yeah, right.
Right. Do
you think that there's, we've talked about it as far as how many states now are constitutional carry, how many, the percentage of the United States by landmass, by population, that is constitutional carry. Do you think there's any point? Do you think there's any set of circumstances that could exist where the anti-gun folks will say, "All right, fine, we're out of here," or we're walking away?
No, not at all.
Or do you think they're just like it's confiscation or bust at this point, or at least from their perspective?
Listen, the gun control lobby has been around in its modern form since, the 1960s, right? And if you look at what they've been demanding, they've kind of walked back a lot of this, right? I mean, in the 60s, you actually had the National Council to ban handguns.
Yep.
That was their primary objective, right? We're going to ban handguns nationwide. And I think it was 1974, it was 50 years ago, Massachusetts had a referendum to ban handguns that failed.
That's right. That's how Gold got started. Yeah.
Okay. So there you go. And if you look now, you won't find a major gun control group that is willing to say publicly, we want to ban handguns, right? Because support for that is somewhere about 20%. About the same number of people say that they believe in Bigfoot as believe that a handgun ban would be constitutional. So in that sense, we have come a long way and they have regressed, but they haven't disappeared, right? And in fact, look, I think the gun control lobby is better funded than it ever has been.
Yeah.
And it's not just because of Michael Bloomberg. Right. I mean, when you've got groups like Giffords now saying that they're going to spend, $15 million in this election cycle promoting anti-gun candidates, they've got a ton of cash coming their way. They have ingratiated themselves in the mainstream of Democratic politics, even though I think gun control is the bastard stepchild of Democratic politics, because, at the end of the day, I mean, you look at Democrats, they are interested in today. So when we're taping this, I don't know when this is going to air, but when we're taping this, it's the 10th anniversary of Michael Brown's death in Ferguson, Missouri.
Yes.
And I saw Chris Brown of the Brady campaign tweeting out today that, police violence is gun violence. That's a phrase that Shannon Watts has used. And this is the same group that routinely exempts law enforcement from every gun control law that they dream up, right? Including Chapter 135 in Massachusetts. I mean, the House bill came out, the Massachusetts Association of Chiefs of Police said, hey, we don't like this. I mean, this affects us. And the Democrats said, oh, well, let's go back and fix that then. We'll exempt you guys. So I think that there is an inherent contradiction with the gun control movement and Democratic politics. Democrats, generally speaking, want to reform the criminal justice system so that nobody goes to prison, right? Or very, very few people go to prison.
That way, yeah.
And incarceration is the last resort, unless perhaps it's, gun owners for nonviolent offenses. Police violence is gun violence. But again, the gun control lobby depends on the police to enforce their laws. If not for the police, who's going to go out and enforce a gun ban or a magazine ban?
Yeah.
So, I think the gun control lobby actually occupies this really odd space. And so as a result, I think that they have to, I also don't know how profane I can get here on this podcast, but I think they've got to, suck up and kiss the rear ends of the Democratic hierarchy.
Let it fly. Let it fly.
Okay, good. Yeah, they got to, they got to kiss ass, right? Because otherwise the Democrats might wake up and realize, oh crap, you guys want to put a lot of people in prison for nonviolent possessory offenses, right? And these laws we know disproportionately impact young minority men. In the Bruin decision, there was a fantastic amicus brief by public defenders in New York City talking about the disproportionate income or outcomes of these gun control laws, right? Yeah. So, it's the gun control lobby is never going to go away. I think they're too well funded for that. The only way that I think they would go away is if they actually got what they wanted. Like if you look at the history of prohibition in this country, alcohol prohibition, right? Yeah. Before the 18th Amendment was passed, there were groups like the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the Anti-Saloon League. The Anti-Saloon League was basically the Everytown of its day. Yeah. Nobody's ever heard of these groups, right? Because they got what they wanted and it was an abject failure. And then prohibition got repealed and they lost all credibility.
Yeah.
Right. So, that might be the only way that the gun control lobby ever truly disappears. And frankly, I prefer they stick around rather than they get their way and then it, all falls apart, right? Because I don't want to live under them getting their way, even for a decade.
Right. Yeah. Amen.
Well, then it begs the question. So why do you think these holdout states, the states that are willing to thumb their nose at the United States Supreme Court, why do they hate the law-abiding gun owner so much when we are not the problem of any part of their world?
I think they hate the law-abiding gun owner because we own guns, right? And for them, there is this idea that if we just got rid of the hardware, if we just got rid of the guns, then everything would be better. And again, go back to prohibition. And, if we just make the demon rum illegal, then, fathers aren't going to spend their evenings in saloons. They're not going to come home and, beat their wives in drunken rages. If we just cut off the ability to drink, then, quite literally we'll have heaven on earth. And of course, it's not how it worked out, right? That's not how gun control has worked out in Mexico, where there's one gun store for the entire country and it's located on an army base in Mexico City. The average citizen in Mexico it's almost impossible for them to legally possess a firearm, but their homicide rate is 5 times that of the United States. The cartels are powerful enough now to directly challenge the Mexican government when they're not co-opting the government.
Yep.
Right. And so,
yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. I think that this animosity is really based on this utopian idea that A, we can get rid of 400 million privately owned firearms in this country. And B, if we did, that criminals wouldn't find a way to get a hold of guns. And so then our, gun violence problem would be solved. And it's a really simplistic solution, but I think is what makes it so appealing to people.
Yeah.
If you just get rid of X, then Y happens. And the truth is life is complicated. And, to quote Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, well, to paraphrase anyway, criminals find a way.
Find a way.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, not only is it's easy, it's also easy in the sense that it's other people that have to give things up, right? So it's the other people, it's the gun owners, as long as they give up their, their hobbies or whatever they choose to call them. If they're the ones that are sacrificing, then it's easy for me to vote for stuff like that. And it's, it goes into the whole like risk aversion thing and statism, collectivism, but that's a whole other podcast, I guess.
Yeah, no, but you're exactly right, because I mean, you just got back from California, so they got their new excise tax, right, on firearms and ammunition.
Yeah.
And again, the idea is, well, we're going to fund gun violence prevention programs. We're going to, fund hospitals, things of that nature. Okay, well, if you want to do that, why doesn't everybody in California have a stake in that, right? Why is it the lawful gun owners who aren't committing crimes,
right,
who have to pay for these programs? I mean, I listen, I'm not adverse to, a lot of the non-law enforcement gun violence prevention efforts. I think there's actually a lot of good work that's being done when you get away from the idea of trying to ban our way to safety or regulate our way to safety. When you start dealing again person to person with these individuals who are committing crimes, I think that's actually hugely beneficial. And if the gun control advocates weren't so busy trying to strip us of our Second Amendment rights, we could probably find some common ground there.
I think so. But
that's not what they want.
No, and when they do put things like that into law, they don't follow through. Like here in Massachusetts, the 2014 bill, there's mandates for things like public outreach and training, education campaigns. None of that stuff gets followed up on or funded in any way. All they care about is banning and restricting gun ownership. That's it. They don't do any of the outreach stuff. They don't do any of the education stuff. Who cares about that, right?
For 25 years ago, you guys had the Massachusetts miracle, right, where juvenile homicides dropped by more than 50%. And David Kennedy, who's with the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York, he wrote a great book about this called Don't Shoot. He was at Harvard at the time. He was one of the people who took part in the original ceasefire program in Boston. And in the book, he talks about how the police chief, Bill Bratton, who I think went on to become the police chief in L.A., started talking about, well, we need background checks, right? We need more of these gun control laws. And Kennedy said, look, you're talking about juveniles. You're talking about people who aren't old enough to legally get a gun. So what's a background check going to do? Right? And so when they started working with the Boston Police Department, the idea was, okay, who are the most violent gangs? Let's map the city. Mm-hmm. Let's figure out who are the most violent gangs, and then who are the most violent individuals in these gangs. And inevitably, these people were already in contact with the criminal justice system. They were already on probation or parole. And that was where the idea for these call-ins came, that, bring these people in and we'll have, basically two groups that present this message. We'll have the law enforcement side that says, you're going to stop shooting, right? And if you don't stop on your own, we're going to make you stop shooting, because we're going to take your cases and you're not going to get a plea deal in the future. We're going to kick it up to federal court and you're going to be sentenced to the maximum, and you're not going to get early release. That's door number one. Mm-hmm. If you don't stop shooting. But here's door number two. If you do stop shooting at each other, if you do stop terrorizing your neighborhoods, we're going to get you the help that you need to turn your life around, whether that's, job training, whether that's getting your GED, whether that's counseling. And look, here's your old elementary school teacher. Here's your pastor. Here are these people who are telling you, we love you. We care about you. That's why we're here. But you're killing our community, and that has to stop. That's what led to a 50% reduction in the juvenile homicide rate in Boston. It wasn't banning so-called assault weapons. It wasn't telling, people, hey, you've got to go through live fire training before you can keep a pistol in your home.
Yeah.
Right. It really was this targeted deterrence. And that's one of the things that's so frustrating, is that for more than 2 decades, Massachusetts lawmakers have known what works.
Yes, they have.
So why aren't they doing it?
Exactly. They know it works, and yet they choose, they willfully choose not to pursue those kind of things.
So that's where I think it goes back to what Jeff was talking about, that this isn't, crime is the excuse. Public safety is the excuse for these laws. But I think the real intention behind them is really, again, to get rid of guns and to get rid of gun ownership, and to make, at the very least, to make exercising your Second Amendment rights seem abnormal and taboo and weird and downright dangerous, right?
Yeah, and all those things, and it's generational too, right? It's the long game. So if if it becomes hard for this generation to own or possess guns, then it's even harder for the next generation and the generation following that one. So the chilling effect is real, and it's cumulative.
I know it's very scary to see and to know parents who tell their children, do not say anything about us owning firearms at school. Do not talk about it to your friends. Mm-hmm. Don't, when they say, what did you do for summer? Don't tell them about the hunting trips. Don't tell them about the outdoors activity. Keep all of that stuff quiet because
you're taboo.
You could stand to get in trouble. Kids get expelled from school for stuff like that.
Did you see there's an Olympic shooter from Massachusetts? I cannot remember her name.
Yes. Ada Corkin. We had a little segment on her last time around. I think she's out of Brookline here.
A couple of weeks ago, I ran across a story where she talked about her experience, and she even seemed a little embarrassed. And she definitely talked about how, you don't bring up the fact that, you're a competitive shooter when you're 13, 14 years old. Like, you're going to get a lot of strange looks from your peers if you do that. A lot of, snide remarks and comments. And that's exactly the type of impact that you're talking about, Jeff, right? Is that they want you to be ashamed of owning a firearm, of being a competent shooter, of being an excellent shooter, right? Because that's a strange sport. Why aren't you cheerleading? Why aren't you wrestling? Why aren't you, doing anything other than competitive shooting? But here's the thing. Look at what just happened at the Olympics. Who were some of the most memeable athletes?
Yeah.
The first one that comes to my mind was the Turkish shooter, right? I mean,
Turkish John Wick.
Yeah. And so as much as they try to make these things culturally taboo, I think innately there is something about shooting that a lot of people, even non-gun owners, look at that and they say, oh, that's really cool. Yeah. And to see somebody like that, I think that tells them, you know what, I could probably do that too. And so that's the battle that we're fighting, right? It's not just in the state house and it's not just in the courthouse. We're fighting this culture war. And part of it really is just about keeping gun ownership normal.
You're right. It's like such a culturally taboo thing here. Everything from the doctor saying, do you have firearms in your home, or to not being comfortable disclosing that you're a shooter. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing at all wrong with it, and yet it's something that you're supposed to keep in the dark.
I know there's an interesting juxtaposition of even in corporate workplaces. You're supposed to talk about all sorts of things that you do behind closed doors in personal business, and you're supposed to identify yourself and be comfortable with who you are, unless you do this one specific thing, which is have any sort of inkling towards defending your life.
Yeah, right.
We don't want to talk about that.
How dare you? You can have a fire extinguisher, that's cool, but
Well, I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard Chris Cheng talk about this, but Chris used to work at Google. Yeah. And he told me during one of our first conversations, he said, I got way more grief for being a gun owner when I came out as a gun owner than when I came out as a gay man. Like, coming out as a gay man at Google, hey, cool, way to go, Chris. But when it became known that he was a gun owner and he liked shooting, it was,
yeah, what's wrong
exactly
with you?
Yeah, and that's I find that so distressing. But I see examples of this all the time. Like my wife, she can access Hot Air and Red State and townhall.com and all of these Salem media websites, with the exception of Bearing Arms. She can't access She can't access the website that I write for on her work computer because that's prohibited, right? You can't access anything having to do with weapons. So, I know it's crazy. But unfortunately, that's the environment in which we operate. And I think it's just incumbent on us to try to figure out a way to get around those barriers that are being erected and to then tear those barriers down.
It's very interesting that you can't access your website because it's weapons related, because you guys don't sell firearms. You're not selling ammunition. You're not conducting raffles. You don't post instructional how-tos. It's just, hey, here are some news stories. Here's some information. Here are some people's thoughts.
Yeah.
And
we don't even really get into guns and gear. I mean, I'd say we're, 95% about the politics of gun
journalism.
control.
It's
Right. But not able to access it.
Wow, that's wild.
Well, since people might not be able to find out from their work computers,
what a segue! What a segue! Just slide right in there. Subtly.
One of the things we ask a lot of our guests is if you had like a bucket list firearm that you wanted to put in the safe that you wanted to have for the home, what does Cam Edwards think is like? What is the top of the list for Cam Edwards?
Man, that is a really good question. Because it has been honestly like just, and I don't mean to bring everybody down, but my wife's had stage 4 lung cancer for like 6 years. So basically all of our free money goes to her medical bill. So I haven't even thought about getting a new gun in years. I've just been happy with the guns that are in my gun closet. I don't know what that dream gun would be. I'll have to come back to that. Let me think about that for a few minutes.
That's a fair answer. All right. Well, I mean, that's kind of an icebreaker question for us. So you have been running Cam & Company for how long now?
So Cam & Company debuted on NRA News April 16th, 2004. And then the NRA TV's demise was 2019. So there was about a 2-week gap before I started at Bearing Arms. So, a little bit more than 20 years for Cam & Company.
Yeah, fair enough. So you're the guy that always interviews people. So now that you're in the hot seat a little bit, let's talk about Cam Edwards for a moment.
Okay.
So where does Cam come from, and how did Cam get started in the Second Amendment?
So Cam actually comes from Massachusetts. I don't know if you guys were aware of that or not, but I was born at Lawrence General 50 years ago. Last week, family lived in Andover. My grandmother lived in Ware, Massachusetts, until she passed away in I think 1994. But my dad worked for a hardware company, and he was a salesman. So when I was 2, he got transferred to Oklahoma, and so we packed up and moved from Massachusetts to Oklahoma. And I've always kind of wondered, like, would I be the same person I was and am if we had stayed in Massachusetts, right? Would I have been exposed to gun ownership and the Second Amendment in the same way that I was? Because my dad owned guns, but he wasn't really, I wouldn't even call him a gun owner, right? His guns were the ones that were, dusty in the attic and then dusty in the basement.
Yeah.
My mom didn't have any firearms. She grew up on a farm in Oklahoma. All of her brothers were ranchers and hunters, or ranchers and farmers. They owned guns, they hunted, but I just was never really around that growing up. So the first real exposure I had, and the first real thinking that I had about gun control, was when I met my wife. We met online back in 1996.
Wow.
In the dial-up days of the internet. Right. Oh yeah, way early
in those days. Nice.
we were beta testers for what became Yahoo Chat. Cool. Right? I know. And we just hit it off, and we would, chat every night. She was a single mom in Camden, New Jersey, which at the time was the murder capital of the United States.
Oh.
And one night we were talking on the phone. It was about midnight, her time. And I heard a gunshot through the receiver of the phone. And then she wasn't answering me.
Oh, Jesus.
And I was just, I was terrified. And we didn't really know each other that well. Like, I didn't know her address, right? Yeah, so I couldn't call 911 and say, hey, I heard gunshots in Camden. I mean, the 911 operator said, yeah, so did everybody else. And they would have hung up, right? So I didn't know what to do. I stayed on the phone as long as I could, just yelling into the receiver. Then I made the mistake of hanging up and trying to call her back. Got the busy signal. I knew where she worked. So the next morning at 8 a.m., I called her office, and I was going to have one of her coworkers go by and check on her. And she answered the phone. Oh. And I was, and I said, we were talking to the gunshot, and she's like, oh, I fell asleep. I was like, how could you fall asleep? I heard the gunshot through the phone. And she said, I live in Camden. She said that, gunshots are like the sound of crickets where you live. You get used to it. You don't even hear them anymore.
Wow.
And I remember saying, doesn't New Jersey have really good gun laws? And that's the way I put it. Really good gun laws. Because at the time I was just completely ignorant. And she just kind of laughed this hollow laugh, like, yeah, sure they do. And so that was kind of my first exposure. Really the first time I ever held a gun. I can tell you this because the statute of limitations has run out. So a few months later, we've met in person. I've proposed to her. She's accepted, and she's moving to Oklahoma. So I fly up to Camden to help her pack up, and we're packing up the contents of her small apartment. And she says, she holds up this rag or like a towel with something wrapped inside. And she said, "We got to get rid of this." And I said, "What is that?" And she said, she said, "Well, Camden had a buyback a few months ago, a gun buyback a few months ago. And so my dad gave me this shotgun to hand in, but they had run out of money by the time I got there. So they just told me to keep it and bring it back later."
Oh my God.
So she unwraps it.
That's beautiful.
It's a sawed-off shotgun.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, not sure why your dad had this, but so I was like, well,
Story.
So we walked from her apartment down to the river, and we threw the shotgun in the river because that's what we didn't know what to do,
That's what they do in the movies.
So exactly. And so that's how we got rid of the gun. So that was the first time I held a gun, was to get ready to throw it in the Delaware River. And and then once she moved to Oklahoma, we had one car. I had just started 2 days after we got married, I started in radio. And so I was a reporter. And so I needed my car to get from place to place. So she had to ride public transportation. She had to ride the bus. And Oklahoma City it has a public transportation system, but at the time it wasn't a very good one. And so, she had to walk several blocks to get to the bus stop. She had to walk several blocks to get home afterwards. And about 2 weeks after she moved and she had found her job and she's going to work, we get a note on our front door. And it was from some dude who had apparently taken a shine to her and left her a little love note, like, "Oh, I think you're so attractive," right?
Whoa.
And so that was that moment of, okay, I need to be able to protect her. I need to be able to protect our kids now, because I when we got married, I became dad. We said that was just a job title. I'm not your biological father, but I'm dad.
Yeah.
And it was I felt like it was my responsibility to protect the people that I love. And so that was how I came into gun ownership, was for personal defense, for defense of my family. And thankfully in Oklahoma, it was, a fairly easy step to become a gun owner. One of the guys that I worked with at KTOK in Oklahoma City was a guy named Mike McCarville. He was the afternoon talk show host at the time, and he ultimately became my mentor. But Mike was the Oklahoma Rifle Association's Journalist of the Year almost every year. He's just a huge Second Amendment supporter, and Mike helped give me an education on, what type of gun I should look for. Went out to H&H Shooting Sports with Miles Hall, and that was my introduction to the Second Amendment. So it didn't come from my family. It really was it was circumstances, and so when I see these laws about 72-hour waiting periods, and all of these things, that I there's a part of me that I don't want to always tell my story time and again, but there are times when people need a gun. Right. There are times when a 72-hour waiting period is not going to be much of an imposition outside of the fact that you've now got to drive back to the gun store, go through this whole process all over again. And I think that's bad enough. But there are also times when people desperately need to be able to protect themselves with a firearm. And these things like, all of these artificial barriers to entry to exercise your Second Amendment rights, they come with a cost. And the gun control advocates love to talk about, well, if it just saves one life, well, how many lives might this cost? Because there is going to be a trade-off. And that's something that, most people don't think about, but I think it's certainly always in my mind. And I think it's, something that most Second Amendment advocates feel very deeply about. It's not just about the theoretical exercise of a constitutional right. We are talking about, literally, for many people, life or death situation.
Absolutely. Right? It's real people. You're absolutely right. I mean, the abstraction of, it's my rights, it's constitutional, the whole philosophical end of it. Yes, that's of course that's valid and it's real. And we talk about that all the time, but it's real people and it's real lives and it's real situations and people. And you're right. This kind of thing does have a cost. But it's not a cost that that the whole anti side cares to talk about, really.
Yeah, no, they'd much prefer to ignore it. Right?
Yep. That's why it's particularly nefarious that I think that gun control groups managed to lobby the CDC to remove defensive gun use statistics from their website and starting to bury and hide that information so that people can't look to information. They can't look to objective studies that say, how many times are these being used to save lives? And I forget what the statistics were before they were deleted, but it was anywhere between...
it was huge.
Yeah, they say 30,
defensive gun use stuff from the CDC. This is, big news, right?
Yeah, I think they were saying, 30,000 people a year at the time were, being shot in either homicide, suicide, whatever the manner was.
Yeah.
But defensive gun uses, depending on how they defined it, were used 10 to 100 times that in successful self-defense situations. Not necessarily every time someone pulling the trigger, but having a firearm, sometimes even just brandishing a firearm, saying, hey, if you keep coming, if you show up at my doorstep, I will protect myself.
That psychological stop is a real thing too. Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. I think most defensive gun uses don't result in a trigger being pulled. And, again, as a gun owner and a Second Amendment advocate, I'm okay with that.
I'm fine with that.
I think most gun owners would prefer not to have to take another life, even if it's justified, right? That still is a traumatic experience. But, there was just a story I wrote about this week. This was in Houston. There was a middle school teacher. He's in his apartment. It's about midnight, and he hears these screams from outside. And he looks outside, and I don't know if he realized it was a teenage girl, but there was a young woman who was basically on the ground being assaulted by a guy. So this teacher grabs his pistol, runs out the door. Hey, what are you doing? Stop, get away from her. And his presence with a gun stopped that attack from going any further. He was able to hold the guy until police arrived. The young woman did not get raped. She did not get sexually assaulted. That, to me, is a win. Right?
Sure it is.
But there are some gun control advocates who would say, well, that doesn't count because the trigger wasn't pulled. So you can't call that a defensive gun use, right? There are others who would say, well, he could have just shouted at the guy, or he could have had a baseball bat or a golf club, right? He didn't need a pistol. All of this second guessing. And, ignoring the fact that, no, first of all, here was somebody who actually did step up, right? It wasn't the Kitty Genovese, syndrome where he just, oh, well, not my problem. He actually did react and he did respond. And I'm sure he wanted to be able to protect himself. He didn't know if this guy had a gun, if this guy had a knife, if this guy was armed. But he also wanted to save a complete stranger, and we see that, I think, time and time again with gun owners who choose to carry that. Yeah, they're carrying primarily for self-defense. But if, God forbid, they're in a position to stop somebody else from being hurt, I think they are willing to do that.
Sure.
Well, in this new legislation, one of the things, and I have yet to see any information on it, is they say that part of the training curriculum now for firearms owners is they're going to have to take de-escalation training. And I'm curious to what do you think that could possibly mean for the average?
Are they going to teach that in? Listen, are they going to teach that in jail too? Are they going to teach that in prison? Is it, or is it just the armed citizen who is told to de-escalate things, not the actual perpetrators of these violent crimes? Right. Am I opposed to de-escalation training in general? No. Do I think it should be mandated before you can exercise your Second Amendment right? Also, no.
Exactly.
Any more than I think you should have a live fire training requirement. Again, we don't have to take a test to show that we know the difference between, libel and slander and protected speech before we can exercise our First Amendment rights. We don't have to go to law school before we get to exercise our Fourth Amendment rights. So why do we think that it is okay to require people to shell out, $100 or hundreds of dollars in, training fees before you can have a gun in your home? Or carry one on the street for that matter? That doesn't make any sense to me. And to me, that is treating the Second Amendment like a second-class right. So, again, the issue isn't gun violence. The issue is violence. So maybe we should be teaching de-escalation tactics in school. Maybe that should be something that, our kids are learning instead of, the Heinz 57 varieties of gender or whatever the progressive ideology of the day is. I mean, if we're already, deciding that, well, math and science, that's really not important. History, we don't even want to talk about that. Maybe public school is a place for this de-escalation training. But I just, to me, it doesn't make any sense, again, to single out law-abiding gun owners as a problem that needs to be solved, because I don't think we are.
Exactly. And taking all of this into account, it leaves the only explanation is like what we're talking about in the beginning. It's about restricting and making taboo gun ownership in general, right? It's about us making the barriers to entry as high as possible, making gun ownership as hard as possible, as expensive as possible to serve the long-term goal of just eliminating it altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, I don't care if whatever one of the 57 genders you are, you have a Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms.
Absolutely.
Self-defense is a human right. It is not a right of the right. It is not a right of, just the whites. This is a right of we the people. And it is an all-encompassing right. So, but again, as you say, right, this effort to price people out of their rights, to shame people out of their rights, if you make six figures, that's probably not a big deal. But when you're 23 years old, you're newly married, you now are, paying for two kids in addition to, putting a roof over your own head. I mean, I can tell you, money was a little tight when I became a gun owner.
Sure.
And, there were financial sacrifices that had to be made. And so, when I see these stories out of California where people are charging, some agencies are charging $1,000
unbelievable
to apply for a concealed carry license. And that's not even, considering the cost of training.
Yeah.
Or you've got these, 18-hour training courses that require you, if you're an hourly worker, you've got to take off 2 days of work. You're missing, half a week's worth of work just so you can get the certificate to show that here's your Second Amendment approval slip. This is problematic, as the kids would say, right? This is something that I think is completely untenable when it comes to any other civil rights. So why should it be acceptable when it comes to our right to keep and bear arms?
Well, Cam, is there anything else you want to add? I mean, we've been super generous with your time tonight, and I don't want to take you away from family for the rest of the evening.
I mean, honestly, the only thing that I would like to add is that, I've known Jim Wallace, almost 20 years now.
Yep.
And I've been honored to speak at some goal events over the years. And I just have to say, the work that you guys do is just so impressive because, you are operating in such unfriendly territory. But the messaging that you're able to get out to non-gun owners, the support that you're getting from the gun owning community in Massachusetts, and the efforts, what you guys have succeeded at doing, and it's tough because in Massachusetts, sometimes success is, well, it's not as shitty as it could have been. Right. And but it's still a success because it isn't as bad as it could have been.
Absolutely.
I think y'all are an inspiration. And I think that the Gun Owners Action League is one of those organizations that should be a model for state level groups around the country. And I hope that gun owners outside of Massachusetts get a chance to listen to this podcast and support the work that Goal is doing. Both in the current litigation as well as just in the ongoing efforts to keep the Second Amendment alive in the state. So I really just appreciate the opportunity to hang out with you guys tonight because you all truly are doing some heavy lifting when it comes to preserving our right to keep and bear arms. So thank you for everything you guys are doing.
Cam, coming from you, that means a great deal. And you've been a great supporter of ours. Your involvement in our rally that we took care of last year, you sent us a video. You've always been, great about interviewing Jim. We've been, I'm a big fan of Bearing Arms and Cam and Company. So I watch, I listen and I read, and the journalism that you do is just top-notch stuff. Can't say enough about it. We appreciate all the support that you've given us as well here in Massachusetts. Well, that's
going to continue because unfortunately you guys are going to continue to need a lot of support. So you've got it. And, Goal always has an open microphone on Cam and Company whenever you or Mike or Jim or anybody else wants to come on and talk about what the heck is happening there in your state.
Yeah,
Listen, man, the fight for freedom started here and it's still going.
it's right.
Absolutely.
Unbelievable. All right. Cam Edwards, Cam Company Bearing Arms. Thank you very much for your time. This has been great.
Hey, thank you guys.
Thank you. And we'll, hopefully we talk soon.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Thanks again. This was fun.
All right. Cam Edwards, great guy, great supporter of ours. He's been, Jim has been on his show a number of times. Mike's been on his show. He's great at getting the word out. He's a great communicator. Good guy to have on your side.
One of the blessings and one of the heartbreaks of all the anti-Second Amendment legislation is just how wonderful all the people you meet in the Second Amendment community are.
Yeah. Yeah. We're not like the boogeymen that people want to make us out to be, right? It's like, you go to events and you meet the people and you're like, you know what? 2A people aren't actually all that bad. So,
Garrett, while you were away, there was absolutely amazing action from fearless leader in the State House, Mara.
Mara?
Now, of course, there has been a lot of turmoil in the national election and people chiming in about what they feel should and shouldn't happen. July 26th, Maura posts this on Twitter.
So when people come at me and come at my freedoms and those whom I love, I feel angry about that. That's not right. And I think we've also got to use that and channel that to get people to understand what's really at stake here and to go out and make sure we do the work and to make the argument that if they're coming for anyone's rights, any of our rights, they're coming for everyone's rights.
Wow, that's amazing. How unself-aware is it possible? I mean,
so she's talking about the national election and who's going to win versus, and at that time, I don't even know if this was pre-Biden dropping out her post or whatever, but she's going on about what she feels might happen if opposition to her gets elected.
Yeah.
And that, if an attack on one is an attack on one is an attack on all. If they're coming for anyone's freedoms, they're coming for all of them.
And she said that without a single shred of irony, I'm sure. Just flew right by. That's beautiful.
And I want to give special thanks. So I'm not a Twitter guy. I don't do the tweets, the X's.
Dude, it's not even Twitter anymore. Get with the times.
That's how it's off it. But Jeff Kozlowski sent that to the Gold Podcast. He said, "You guys got to see this.
You got to see this."
So I asked him. I wanted to make sure I gave him a shout out for sending that in.
Nice.
It was it's so frustrating to watch her say something like
without a shred of irony. Yeah, right.
And likewise, there was another budget bill there was another bill that was going through that Speaker Mariano was less a fan of.
Yeah.
And saying openly, well, this is very end of the session and this is too last minute. We don't really have a time to read or understand this. And we shouldn't be rushing through legislation without reading it.
Another completely unself-aware.
A little bit louder for the people in the back.
Yikes. We laugh about it, but it really is tragic.
The irony is stunning.
Oh, unbelievable. So there we are. Appreciate Cam coming on. We are going to be really focusing on, obviously, on Chapter 135, its ramifications. There are a number of efforts underway. Stay tuned to goal.org and, of course, the Goal Podcast as we advance through some of these things. Think of it as the trident, right? There's multiple points of the spear. We've got litigation happening. We're working on this referendum effort, some legislative stuff going on. We are in contact with other national level groups, and information on those things will be forthcoming as the timing is appropriate, right? Also, with respect to this referendum effort, it has begun and it's in process. There are some administrative things that have to happen, at the state end. They have to prepare some paperwork. So please stay tuned. We will be organizing, continuing to organize a massive signature drive because we're going to need it. Every gun owner in the state's going to have to step up so that we can get the signatures in place that we need to push this forward. Also, let's face it, the situation that we're in right now, like Jim said last time he was on here, lawyers are not cheap. Every one of us is going to have to open up our wallets and really step up and enjoying this fight. because this is a fight. We're in the fight of our lives right now, you know. So with regard to the referendum paperwork, shout out yesterday, it was myself, Mike Harris was there, Toby and Matt from Cape Gun Works and Rapid Fire Radio, Jessica Kedziora, she's going to yell at me if I get this wrong, Kedziora, from Fight Back MA, and of course, the man himself, Charlie Cook from Riding Shotgun with Charlie. We were down there in person getting this paperwork filed. So for more detail on that, check out goal.org. As always, stay tuned for developments, and we'll have more to say. So that is going to do it for today. Thanks for listening in. Be sure to subscribe to the Goal Podcast and check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/Goal Podcast MA, on YouTube at the Goal Podcast, or on Twitter at Goal Update.
To join Goal, visit goal.org and click the Join Renew button on the top of the homepage.
If you have a topic you think we should cover, if there's something going on in your club or town, or if you have a question for the mailbag, shoot us an email at goalpodcast@goal.org.
The Goal Podcast is a production of Gun Owners Action League of Massachusetts. The views and opinions expressed are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of Goal, its staff, or affiliates.